In a perfect world, your C# application is going to work right the first time. And if that happens to you every single time, you know what? This video probably isn't for you. But for the rest of us, let's look at some techniques to quickly identify where the problem is so we can fix it. Now, here I have an application that I built, and this application is just a demo application. It's not meant to be an actual full-fledged application. And in fact, this application doesn't even work. If I hit run here, I get this nasty exception. Now, this takes me right to the part of the code where this exception happens, but let's first figure out why this exception is happening. As you can see, I'm getting a system.argument_out-of-range exception. Now we're going to pretend for a minute we don't know why that's happening. I want to create this ultra complex example where it's hard to spot the error. So those of you who are watching at home, you may look at this and say, oh, I see the error. I know how to fix it. But that's not really the point here. The point here is we don't know. We're going to pretend we don't know why this is happening. And so how do we fix this? Well, the first thing we can do is we know the error happens here on line 26 inside of our person class. So we can use what's called a breakpoint to stop the operation somewhere in here before we get to that point, so we can look at the data and identify what's happening and walk through the code. So let's do that. Now, if you want to look at this function and see what it's actually doing, we're taking the first name property. What we're doing is we're just saying, hey, every other character, make it an uppercase letter. It's really funky and weird, but that's what we wanted to do. This right here, this line right here, line 26, is our problem, but we don't know why. And in fact, line 26 isn't actually our problem every time. But what we can do is say, well, if line 26 is the problem, I can click over here in this gray gutter over here and notice this red spot that appears, and it also highlights my line in this maroon color. And what this indicates is that we have a breakpoint here. Now, the job of a breakpoint is to stop the code at this particular instance or this particular spot and allow us to identify what's going on right now, kind of like pausing time. You know, we hit the pause button at this point, and we can look at where everything is as it is frozen in time. And then we can actually start walking through and looking at what happens next and why it happens. So let's just look at, first of all, what a breakpoint does by hitting the start button. Okay, notice the screen flashed really quickly on, and then it went right to this line of code, and we're now highlighted in yellow. And if you can see over here on the left, in that little circle is now a yellow arrow. That indicates that we have paused our application at this line, and now we can look at all the different variables as they are in this moment in time. So if I mouse over my first name property, you can see that first name equals Timothy. That's a little small, but there you go. First name equals Timothy. Okay, so that's the value right now of our first name property. Now we can also look at the I variable. I is currently 1. And if we look at output, output has just a capital T, and that's it. At this point, we know what's going on, but we're not quite sure why we're getting that error. That didn't really help us that much. It looks like the variables are right. And in fact, first name, a substring of first name at position 1, 1 character, means it's going to look for the I in Timothy because it's 0, 1. 0 is T, 1 is I. That looks right. So now what we can do is we have 3 options. And if you look up here, you can see those 3 options: step into, step over, and step out. We're going to primarily use the step into F11, but once in a while we'll use F10. And I'll get into what those do in a minute. But let's first look at the step into. And what this does, this is F11, or this icon right here. Step into says take 1 step in the application. That's it. So do one thing and then stop again. So in this case, it completed this one line, and then it stopped at our end curly brace. And now we can actually look at output again and see output now has TI, because that I was uppercased and then added to our output. So that worked. Line 26 didn't blow up, but we're in a for loop, so it may blow up next time. Now what we can do here is a couple different things. One, we could hit F11 and step through line by line over and over again. The other option, though, is to hit the continue button right up here, or F5, and that will, I just did that, that will allow the code to continue running as if it were normally running. But then notice it's back here on this line. And the reason why is because we still have our breakpoint here. And so our breakpoint says, oh, you hit that line, so go ahead and pause. And now if we look, I is 3 instead of 1, which means that we've run this for loop twice, not just the once. Because this if right here, it says I modulus 2 equals 0. Well, this right here, the percent sign, is called modulus. And what it means is it tells us the remainder of this division. So for example, 2 divided by 2, there's a 0 is a remainder. Therefore, this would be true if I was 2. I is 3, so 3 modulus 2 means 2 goes into 3 one time fully, and that's it. And it's a remainder of 1. Therefore, this would be false, and we go down to the else statement. So basically what this does is these are evens, and these are odds. Okay? So we come down here and we say, well, I is 3, and first name has at least 3 characters, therefore we're good. So actually it's 4 characters because we're a base 0, and that's going to be something that comes up in a minute. So let's go ahead and we can hit F11 and step into one line, and then look at our output. And our output now says TIMO, which is great. The other thing we could do is just hit F5 if we wanted to. And I hit F5 or the continue button up here. And now I've gone to the next time we hit this breakpoint. In this case, I is 5 instead of 3. I can hit continue again. And now I is 7. And our output says, if you notice, our output says Timothy. And that's where we get our first clue that something's not right. Because our output has our entire name in there. If you notice the first name variable or property, it's Timothy. There's no extra space at the end. There's nothing extra on the end. So if output already has the full value of Timothy, then why are we coming to this code again? We're going to add another character. What character is there to add? Well, if we look, first name dot substring 7, 1. So what's at the 7th position? Well, remember this is a base 0. So T is 0, I is 1, M is 2, O is 3, T is 4, H is 5, Y is 6. Where's 7? We don't have a 7. We can't go 7. Therefore, the character at position 7 would throw an error. And in fact, if we zoom out here and actually step into this code, we get this error, argument out of range exception. And that exception simply tells us, hey, you're out of bounds. You can't look for position 7 in your strings. You only have through position 6. And so there's our error. So we now know what our error is because we debugged this. Now we need to figure out, well, why are we going to 7? Shouldn't we be stopping before that since there's only 0 through 6? So we know we have to look back up here at this for line on line 18 because we're going one step too far. So if I hit continue right now, it will blow up. If I hit stop or shift F5, they'll stop the application from running. All right, I went ahead and did that. So now our application is stopped, so we can make modifications. Now let's look at why this error happened. Well, if we look at this line, which is the line we need to inspect, we start at 0. Well, the substring is 0 base, so that's great. We start at 0 and we say, well, I++, so only one character at a time, which is great, but I is less than or equal to firstname.length. Well, what's the length of our name? It's 7 characters. Because for length, that's the number of characters, not a array position. So it doesn't start at 0, it starts at 1. So if you had a 1 character first name, the length would be 1. In my case, Timothy is 7 characters. Therefore, firstname.length is 7 characters. So I is less than or equal to 7. So if I is 7, we're going to run this code. That's a problem. And that's where we really should have followed the default pattern for a for, which is I is less than firstname.length. That accounts for the zero-based versus the count of the letters. If we run this again, now the output shows on the screen as Timothy and there is no error. So we know we've corrected that problem. So that's how you use the debug to identify and solve problems. We click on the gutter over here on the left and place a breakpoint. We place that breakpoint wherever you want where there's code. So if we said, you know what, I want to start off right off the bat with this spot right here to debug. That's fine. You can also place more than one at a time. So you could place one down here. Let's place it there. And another one over here. That's fine. That way what you can do is when you hit start, you can just say, okay, I'm looking at that, then look at that, then back and forth. And when you're done, you can even take it out halfway through. Now I can hit start again or continue, and it will go until this next breakpoint. And I can look at output and say, okay, that's what the output is. So there's a lot you can do with breakpoints just on their own, but one of the things that is often overlooked is the fact that breakpoints do more than just pause the application. In fact, breakpoints don't even have to stop the application at all. Let's look at an example. If I hit run, notice how the capital T and the capital I are together. I didn't really want that. Let's shift this so that it's capital T, lowercase I, uppercase M, and so on. Now I've got to identify, well, why is it doing it not the way I expected? Because here I said I divided by 2, therefore the second letter should be the case that you gave me. The third letter should be uppercase. So I'm thinking the first letter and the third letter, because these are the ones that are odd. Now again, my logic is flawed because we're a zero-based counting system. And this is where, when you're doing a for loop, debugging is great, because getting that zero-based versus the length total or count, those things can very easily get you tripped up, which is which. And debugging allows you, even if you don't have an error, to make sure that your code is working the way you intend. So let's just start with, I want to know every time it's an even letter, what it is and what the value of I is. So I put my breakpoint right over here on line 22. But instead of stopping the application, I just want to know what those values are. Now I could run this, and if I did, I could look at I every single time and say, okay, I is 0. Now what's the output going to be? And I could step into, and I can actually put my breakpoint down here. It's a little cleaner, because now the output is T. But mousing over two different things is kind of a pain. I could solve that. Notice I mouse over. Let's zoom in here. When I mouse over, there's a little pin right here. I can actually pin this. And I can also go over here and pin the output. And now, if I zoom back out, I is 0 and output is T. If I hit F5 to continue to the next time this breakpoint is hit, watch what happens to the values of I and output. I is now 2 and output is Tim. I is now 4, and output is TIMOT. And then I is now 6, and we have the full Timothy. Okay, so that allows us to see what's happening just by pinning these values. And if I want to get rid of them, I just mouse over them and hit the X. Now the cool thing is, I'll leave this one for now. If I hit stop, notice those pins kind of go away, but there's a little pin indicator here. You can mouse over that and you can see it. But if I run this again, that's pinned still. And that's kind of nice. But let's go ahead and hit close on this. And I'll also stop my application. So is there a better way to show us what's going on and maybe even what each character is that's being added one at a time? What we can do is right-click on our breakpoint. Now notice there's a lot of options here. We can delete the breakpoint, which I've been doing just by clicking on it again. We can disable the breakpoint, and what that essentially does is leaves it as if it wasn't even there, but yet it's still on the sideline, the gutter, for when you need it later. You can re-enable it. But we can also add conditions and actions. Let's look at actions. Now on this action right here, it says log a message to the output window. And then we also have this option down here, continue execution. So let's say, and notice it even gives you kind of example text you can use. So $function would give you the function name, so funky name builder. That way, if you have multiple of these breakpoints, you would know which one was being called. In this case, we don't really care, but you know what? It doesn't hurt to show you how it works. So $, and notice the IntelliSense, that's amazing. $function, so that's the function name. Let's put a colon. The value of I is curly brace I close curly brace. And the letter is curly brace first name, notice IntelliSense, dot substring I comma 1. Close curly brace. And what that allows us to do is actually see what the value of I is and what the value of that individual letter is by calling this exact same code. Now I hit close. Notice it says continue execution. That means we're not going to pause the application. We're just going to output this message to the output window and keep going. So we hit close. And now note that our former circle, remember it looked like this, is now this diamond. And that indicates we're doing an action on this row. So let's go ahead and pin our output window. Let's go ahead and clear it as well. And now I'm going to hit start. Now a lot of things use the output window. Oh, went away. There we go. So there's our output window. And if we look, console UI.person.funkyNameBuilder. That's our method name. The value of I is 0, the letter is T. The value of I is 2, the letter is M. The value of I is 4, and the letter is T. And the value of I is 6, and the letter is Y. So there's the 4 times that breakpoint was hit, and the values for both I and T, or anything else you want to show. Also note the application fully ran, meaning it didn't stop anywhere. If we wanted to, we could change this breakpoint. Again, right-click and say Actions. We could change this to pause the application if you wanted to, or not. But let's go ahead and say no, don't continue. No, let's go back to a red circle, or yes, continue. Now it's that diamond again. But next, let's look at other options. We right-click and say Conditions. Now, this condition, what it's going to allow us to do is say, only hit this breakpoint under certain circumstances. For example, this breakpoint gets hit when I is 0, 2, 4, and 6. What if we said that I has to be lowercase I has to be greater than 2. So now it should be we only hit this on 4 and 6. And if we go ahead and scroll down here, let's make sure that's actually set. So that's set. I is greater than 2. We hit close. Notice that if we look at the icon here, it's a diamond with a white plus in the middle. That white plus indicates that we're not always going to hit this breakpoint. We have some type of condition on it. So let's clear our output window and run this again. And notice down here that we have 2 entries, funky name builder. The value of I is 4, the letter is T, and the value of I is 6, and the letter is Y. So it only hit that breakpoint twice. Once for the T and once for the Y, because in the other occasions, I was not greater than 2, therefore we didn't hit that breakpoint. So the question you might ask yourself is, when would I ever use either the action or the condition? And there's a couple of times when I found them valuable. One is sometimes you need to debug only at certain points. For example, you're loading 1,000 records and you know that there's an error somewhere around the 600 mark. So you don't want to hit that breakpoint every single time. So what you do is you hit that breakpoint at, say, 590 and step through the last 10 before 600. Or maybe you put it 600 and see what happens. And you keep changing that until you know that your breakpoint is right before where the error is. And then you can look at all the variable values at that error time. The other time you might find it valuable is when you only want to break when certain things are true. For example, you're processing a whole list and you know that whenever you pull up this one user's file and process it, you have an error. But again, you don't want to loop through every single user. You want to only target that one particular person. So you put a condition on it that says only if the user ID is this user's user ID will you stop at the record. So there's a lot of advanced cases where either the condition or the action can be really useful. So let's go ahead and delete that breakpoint. Now, so far I've covered the step into, or F11. But let's look at the other options we have. So let's put a breakpoint. I'm back in program.cs and the static void main. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here on line 18. And let's hit start, and it will stop at that particular line. Let's clear the console and get that out of the way. So here I am paused on line 18. Again, that's now in yellow, meaning the application is running and we're stopped at this point. And I say, you know what? I don't really care to go into this function. But let's see what happens if I hit step into F11. It actually takes me to the funky name builder method. And I go, you know what? I didn't want to be here. You have a couple of options. One, you could stop the application and restart it and put your breakpoint in a different spot, and that's just dumb. Especially if your application is big and you have a lot of setup stuff to do. It's just messy. Don't do that. Instead, what you can do is you can do the step out of, or step out, which is Shift F11, or I just click this button here because I use it so rarely. But the idea of step out of is we're in this method right here. Let's go through the entire method, hit the return, and then when that return sends us back to our caller, we're going to go ahead and pause the application again. So it won't pause in here anymore. It will wait until it's all done this and has sent the values back to our caller. And at that point, we'll pause the application again. So let's do that. Step out. So right now we're paused here on line 15. Let's do step out. Note we're back in static void main. And if I hit the step into now, it goes to the next line. And the reason it didn't go to the next line when I hit step into the first time is because right here, this has to be resolved before we can do the console.write line. And so it resolved it by taking us to this method. But once it's resolved, the actual value had come back. Now it highlights this line and actually runs it. So I hit step into again, it goes to the next line, which in this case is line 20. So that's one way of doing it, but there has to be an easier way. And in fact, there is. So if we run this again, I am here on this line, and I say, you know what? I don't want to go into this method. And I know that if I go into the method, I can hit step out, but that's not really that efficient. What's a better way of doing that? And that would be the step over. And that's F10, or this button right up here. So what F10 does is it says, don't leave this particular method. Just step over any calls that would take you into another method. So let's see that in action. So if I hit the step over, or F10, it skipped over the funky name builder, went right to line 20, as if we never were there. In fact, let's do this again real time. I'll move my breakpoint up to here. I'm going to hit start. I'm going to hit the step over, which seems to work just like the step into, except for the fact that it doesn't go into any methods that you're calling. So I can hit step over right now, even though it's not really stepping over anything, and it still works. So let's hit step over again and again. And it kind of skipped over the idea of diving into funky name builder method. So that's really the basics of debugging using these breakpoints. The idea is if you know where to look or have a good guess of where to look to figure out why your application isn't working, you go ahead and click in the gutter on the line number of your offending line. In this case, we'll do on line 16. And then whenever you run the application, if it's a generic breakpoint, it's going to stop once we hit this line that's highlighted. You can have more than one. And you can also right-click on your breakpoint and add conditions or actions to limit what happens to the breakpoint when it's hit, or to do something once it is hit and maybe even skip over it. So that's a little bit of advanced stuff. But the basics are breakpoint, just click and you're good to go. If you don't know where to put your breakpoint, you're just not sure at all, here's a quick tip. Just put it at the beginning and then step through line by line by line. And if your application is pretty large, yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. You're going to need to have a little better idea than that. But what this allows you to do is it allows you to look at everything and have no assumptions. You know exactly what's happening line by line. The other key here is, the big idea is that these breakpoints aren't just for debugging. They're also really helpful in your learning. So you know exactly what's going on because you're watching what the compiler is going to do in your application when it's run in real time. So you can see how it changes variables and it morphs things. And you say, you know what? I didn't expect that. I don't want that. And then you know exactly what you need to do to fix whatever's happening because you know where the issue is. If you have 1,000 lines of code, it's hard to debug. But if you have 1,000 lines of code and you know that things go horribly wrong on line 893, it's a lot easier to fix. And that's what debugging helps you do using breakpoints. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit like down below. I'd also love it if you'd subscribe. I'm going to be putting out more content like this in the near future. Also, if you want to have a heads up on the big things that are coming out, get some behind the scenes access and also some bonuses that I send out once in a while, go ahead and sign up for my mailing list. There's a link down below where you can click on that and just give me your email address and your name and you'll be signed up for the list. Don't worry, I won't spam you. I'm very careful about that. I like to protect your email address as if it were my own. All right, thanks for watching.